recently shared in a social media post the weight of my RC drift car, front, rear, and total, and then asked what everybody else's cars looked like. And I got a super wide range of results. Everything from down in like the 1,000 gram to 1,100 gram level, all the way up to some groups that were like, our whole club runs 1,800 gram cars. And this reinvigorated my passion for trying to figure out, like, is there really like a best weight for a drift car? So when I was recently at my local drift track, Cookeville Hobbies, I took my drift car and I tested it. As it sits just like this with a battery in it is about 1,260 grams. I then drove it for a number of laps on track, paying attention to exact braking points, paying attention to how did it accelerate. Then watching the camera footage back, I was able to record exactly how long each lap time was, acceleration zones, things along this line. Then I did something silly. I took tools and I taped them to the body. I taped them both front and rear. And then I measured it again, and every time as I went through this, I made sure that I did not disrupt the front-rear balance. I had about a 63%, something like that, rear weight balance, and the whole way through I made sure that as I added weight, I kept that same front and rear weight balance to not disrupt that part of it. And I just kept adding weight to 1,300, to 1,400, to 15, to 1,600 grams, and continued to drive it back to back to see what it did. The results from this were actually really interesting. As I added weight for basically every 100 grams you add to the car, I lost 1/10 of a second of lap time. Every 100 grams, 1/10 of a second. When I went from 1260 to 1352, 1/10 of a second. 1352 to 1473, 1/10 of a second. 1470 to 1694, 2/10 because it was 200 grams. So every step that I went along the way, it continued to make the car slower and slower. And beyond lap time, I could actually feel it in the car. I could feel that if I kept the same braking point, I would slide further into the corner. So as I drove, I had to back the braking point up a little bit and more and more. The car wanted to hang longer, right? It had more momentum going into the corners. So it wasn't easier to drive. It didn't have better traction. It didn't come out of the corners faster. It didn't do any of that. Everything was slower. What does all this mean then? If you are looking for what is the best weight to be running your car at, I have 3 things that I think you should consider. First, does your local track have any rules? It sounds like there are some tracks out there across the country that actually have kind of setting expectations around weight, front rear balance, that kind of thing. So of course, if you're going to be drifting in that location, you need to check it out there. The second thing is, what are you after? What are your goals? Is your goal to be the fastest car on track? Is your goal to be like the most stylish? I had somebody responded to all of this, and this person wanted to mimic their full-size cars as much as possible. So they were trying to match the front rear weight balance of their full-size 1.1 car in their RC to get it to drive the same. Sweet. That's obviously a very different goal than I want to be fast. So what are your local track rules? What are your goals? And then the last one is, there's this big group out there called Super G. If you've never heard of them, really, really popular in the US, probably the most premier drift location in the whole of the United States. They have rules. And if you are going to go and do any Super G competition or any competition that's related to Super G, then honestly, they make this whole conversation pretty easy for you. It's written right there in the rule book. So in their rules, it actually says the minimum weight for your total car is 1,300 grams. So you can't go below that. You have to be above 1,300 grams. And clearly they think that lower weight is faster because they only put a minimum on it. They don't say your car has to be between 1,300 and 1,400. They don't say it has to be within a certain range. They just say minimum of. And then when it comes to front rear balance, they actually put a maximum total weight on the rear of 1,100 grams. Now, in case you were trying to do the math in your head, if you actually maximize a car to the Super G rules with 1,100 grams on the rear and 1,300 total grams of weight, that's something like an 84% rear weight bias. I don't even know if that's possible. I literally don't know if that's actually something that's actually doable. And if you then flip that on its head and say, okay, well, if I wanted a 70% rear weight bias and my rear weight bias is going to be 1,100 grams, then what's the total weight of my car? Like 1,570. Something along those lines. So probably if you're in the Super G comp series, you're probably going to be in that 1,300 to 1,600 gram weight is my guess for your car. Now that we've talked about what I would recommend for you, what am I going to do? How am I going to enact this with my drift car itself? I'm only 63% rear weight as this car sits right now. I'm going to look at moving the battery and doing some other things like that to see if I can get even more weight to the rear of this car. The second thing I'm going to do is look at getting myself just over that 1,300 gram weight limit, because there's a couple tracks near me that are talking about doing some comps via Super G rules this year, which means I need to meet that minimum 1,300 weight. So exactly what I'm going to do, where that weight's going to be placed, I don't really want to add any extra weight to my car, but I'm going to have to a little bit because I'm like 40 grams under it right now. I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions about what I did or how I did it, then feel free to leave those down in the comments below. Happy to have a discussion with you down there about them. If you have any other questions about drift tech or tuning or anything along those lines, there's a playlist that's going to be popping up right over here to your right, and I will see you in that one. Thank you and goodbye.